The rain had stopped just before noon, leaving a thin shine on the sidewalks outside the law office. The sky was gray and soft, clouds hanging low over the town. Inside the building, the lights were warm and steady, and the hall smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. The waiting room was quiet, except for the slow tick of a wall clock and the rustle of a magazine someone turned and then forgot to read. In a corner, a young woman sat with her hands in her lap, fingers pressed together so tightly the knuckles were white. Her name was Sarah. She wore a plain black dress and a dark sweater, the kind people pick when they are tired and sad and do not want to think. She stared at the floor, but her mind was far away, in a kitchen with yellow curtains, in a cabin with a crooked porch, in the soft sound of her father's laugh when he told her she would always have somewhere safe to go. Beside her sat her brother, Daniel. He was a few years older, his shoulders broad, his hair neat, his tie straight. He watched the door to the inner office with calm eyes. He had that stillness that makes other people lower their voices without knowing why. He had spoken very little since their father died. When he did speak, it was gentle and short, like lifting a small weight. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and a tidy bun, looked up and gave them a sad smile. "Mr. and Ms. Reed? Mr. Halpern is ready to see you now." Sarah stood too quickly and had to steady herself. Daniel rose more slowly, thanked the receptionist, and put a reassuring hand at the small of Sarah's back as they walked down the short hall. The lawyer's office was lined with books that reached almost to the ceiling, their spines dark red and brown and black. A wide window looked out on the wet street. The lawyer, Mr. Halpern, stood as they entered. He was in his 60s, with soft grey hair and a face that seemed to fold into sympathy. "I'm very sorry for your loss," he said, shaking their hands with both of his. "Please, sit. We'll take this one step at a time." Sarah nodded and tried to breathe normally. Daniel sat without a word. On the desk was a neat stack of papers, some with blue tabs, some with yellow. There was a small wooden box too, with a brass latch. Mr. Halpern removed his glasses, cleaned them, and then put them back on as if preparing for a delicate surgery. "Your father was a careful man," he began. "He kept things simple, and he kept them honest. He prepared a standard will 3 years ago and updated it last year after some improvements to the cabin." Sarah's head lifted a little at the word cabin. It was not big or fancy. It was a 2-room place near a small lake, where the water was clear and quiet in the mornings and full of insects and light in the evenings. The porch leaned a little to the left, and the screen door always stuck, but her father had loved it. He said the land was the last place in the world that felt like it still belonged to people who listened. "The will divides personal property and accounts," the lawyer went on in the careful tone of someone who has done this often. "There are small bequests to a charity and to your father's old army friend. The main items are the parcel of land on Cedar Hill, including the right-of-way road, and the structure, what we call the cabin. Your father notes that the parcel is free of liens, taxes paid, and that he holds title in fee simple. It's all quite clean." Sarah felt the tightness in her chest ease, just a little. "He wanted me to have it," she said softly, trying to keep her voice from breaking. "He always said, 'The cabin is yours.'" Mr. Halpern gave a slow, approving nod. "Yes." He wrote, "To my daughter, Sarah Reed, I leave the cabin and the land attached thereto, with all rights and improvements, to be hers entirely and without condition." Sarah closed her eyes. For a moment the hard world of paper and ink and offices receded, and she saw the lake, and the old rowboat with one blue oar and one white, and her father handing her a mug of coffee on a cold morning when mist curled over the water. She opened her eyes and drew a steady breath. "Thank you," she whispered. Mr. Halpern glanced toward Daniel. "There is also the question of the executor. Your father appointed an executor to carry out the terms of the will, to sign where needed, to challenge any improper claims, to make sure the process is honored." Sarah glanced at her brother, but his face was the same calm mask as before, eyes steady, mouth relaxed, hands folded lightly in his lap. "Who is it?" she asked. The lawyer looked down at the page and smiled slightly. "He appointed your brother, Mr. Daniel Reed." Sarah felt a quick warmth, a kind of safety, at the words. It would be all right. Daniel was steady, meticulous, the kind of person who checked locks twice and carried an umbrella even when the sky was clear. If anyone could protect her father's last wishes, it would be him. We'll review signatures, Mr. Halpern continued, and then we can. The door opened without a knock. 3 people walked in like they owned the air. A man in a navy blazer with a silver pin on his lapel. A woman in a tight smile and a crisp folder. Another man carrying a tote with a printed logo, Lake Heights HOA. The receptionist hurried into the room, flustered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Halpern. They said this was urgent, and it is urgent," the man in the blazer said, cutting her off with the kind of politeness that feels like a slap. "We'll only take a moment." He set a glossy folder on the edge of the lawyer's desk as if setting a flag on conquered land. "Good afternoon. I'm Richard Cole, president of Lake Heights Homeowners Association. This concerns the parcel on Cedar Hill." The room cooled. Mr. Halpern's mild expression sharpened by a degree almost too small to see. "Mr. Cole," he said, voice even, "this is a private reading of a will. You are not invited." "I understand," Cole replied with an easy smile. "But this will reading involves a property under our jurisdiction, and we have standing. The parcel and the structure are subject to HOA control. The association has already recorded a community claim pursuant to—" "No," Sarah said, before she could stop herself. "No, the cabin is not part of Lake Heights. It never was." Cole didn't look at her. He looked at the lawyer. "Ms. Reed is mistaken. There was a vote last year to incorporate properties along Cedar Hill Road into the Lake Heights community standards. We sent notices. We're here to prevent any confusion." He slid a trifold brochure from his folder like a magician's trick. It showed pictures of happy families on clean sidewalks, a pool that was never empty of sunlight, a list of rules written in soft fonts. The woman with the crisp folder added, "We want to make this easy. The association welcomes community. We will absorb any property management burden. All Ms. Reed needs to do is sign a transfer. Given the past due assessments and violations, it's really the smoothest path." Sarah stared at the woman. The words fell like small stones. "Past due? Violations? My father paid his taxes on time for 30 years. He wasn't even in your community." "We'll get to the details," Cole said warmly, still ignoring her eyes. "We simply need the executor to acknowledge our claim so we can begin improvements and avoid fines." He turned to Daniel. "You're Mr. Reed, I presume. You can sign today." Daniel looked at him as if he were a painting he had seen before, one he did not especially like. His face did not change. He did not reach for a pen. He did not even blink faster than usual. Mr. Halpern folded his hands. "Let me be clear, Mr. Cole. This property is not under your association. It is outside your platted map. There is no covenants, conditions, and restrictions document binding this land. We've checked deeds back to the 1980s. Your claim is, how shall I put this, aspirational." The smile on Cole's mouth stayed the same, but something flickered behind his eyes. The man with the tote shifted his weight. The woman with the crisp folder said, "With respect, counsel, our board recorded an annexation. We have a vote, signed minutes, and we have already issued preliminary violation notices for unapproved fence, unapproved dock, and non-compliant exterior color." She spoke calmly, but there was a little hunger under the words, the careless confidence of people who are used to winning because everyone else gives up first. Sarah felt heat rise in her face. She looked at Daniel, but he was still. He had that quiet posture that always made her think of the lake before sunrise, a flat surface and something deep moving under it. Mr. Halpern's kindness vanished now. He turned a page, scanned a line, and set a finger on it. Annexation of non-consenting property requires a petition, notification, and county approval. You have none. Your vote is meaningless beyond your borders. You issued notices to a man you had no jurisdiction over. If you came today to make a mistake bigger, I suggest you stop here." Cole chuckled softly, as if someone had told a joke in poor taste. "No need for drama. The association is willing to be flexible. The cabin is cute." He glanced at Sarah for the first time and let his eyes sweep over her like a measurement. It sits in a desirable corridor. We can take the management burden off your hands. If the executor signs a voluntary transfer, the board will consider waiving the initial fines and assessments. Waive fines, you invented. Sarah snapped. You barged into a will reading and think you can threaten us into giving you our father's home. Cole's smile widened a fraction, as if he enjoyed the heat. Threaten? Oh no. I'm trying to help. The alternative is litigation. Our association has resources. It can be very expensive to learn where one stands. The room went quiet again. Sarah felt the old anger move through her, the kind that makes the tongue heavy and the air hard to pull into the chest. She had never liked fighting. Her father had taught her to pick up her tools and fix what she could, to walk away from petty people and keep her hands clean. But there are moments when walking away is just another word for losing. She turned to Daniel, ready to plead, ready to say, please say something, please stop this, please don't let them take what is ours. But Daniel did not meet her eyes. He was watching Cole as one watches the slow approach of a dog that has forgotten it is small. Mr. Halpern leaned back and tapped his pen on the desk. Once, twice. He spoke in a voice that carried an edge now. You are trespassing in my office, Mr. Cole. Leave your brochure. Leave whatever copies you think will matter. Then leave. We only need the executor's signature, the crisp folder woman said, still polite, still hungry. It's a routine authorization, Mr. Reed. She slid a single sheet across the desk toward Daniel. There was a signature line at the bottom, a neat box for a date, a place for initials. Above it the word swam as if seen underwater, voluntary acknowledgement of community jurisdiction and transfer of architectural control. Sarah felt her heart kick, sick and sharp. She wanted to grab the paper and tear it, but her hands were on her knees, and they would not move. Cole tilted his head. Be sensible, he said. You can't fight a board. We have the budget. We have counsel. We have the patience to make this very difficult. The clock on the wall ticked. A car hissed through the wet street outside. The building seemed to hold its breath. Daniel reached out and took the paper with 2 fingers. He lifted it, read it slowly, the way a careful person reads the label on a poison bottle. He set it back down. His eyes were gentle when he finally raised them, not toward Sarah, not toward the lawyer, but toward the 3 visitors. He spoke for the first time since they had entered. No, it was not loud. It did not need to be. The word sat in the room like a small stone on a sheet of glass you suddenly realize is very thin. Cole blinked, surprised. People like him do not hear that word often. You misunderstand, he said after a beat, voice warm again. This is not optional. Daniel's mouth moved just enough to show a polite shape that was not a smile. You misunderstand. You are done here. The tote man stepped forward as if he might take the paper back by force. Mr. Halpern didn't raise his voice, but the tone changed, iron under velvet. Touch anything on my desk and I will call the police. Cole put a quieting hand out, as if taming a servant. Let's not be hostile. We are trying to create harmony. The board really can be generous. He slid a business card across the desk with 2 fingers. Think about it. There are penalties we can avoid if you cooperate now. Daniel did not look at the card. He looked at Sarah, and in that look there was a layer she had seen only a few times in her life. When he told a bully to go home without raising his voice. When he stood between her and a man who was yelling near a gas pump. When he paid a bill quietly and refused to explain why. It was the look of a person who had already measured the problem and chosen the tool. We're finished, Daniel said. He turned his head just enough to address Mr. Halpern. Is there anything else we need from them today? The lawyer's soft smile returned, thin and bright. Only their absence. Cole's smile thinned. He picked up his glossy folder as if it were clean and the room were not. We will proceed, he said. Expect notices. Expect fees. Your father's, what did you call it, cabin, will meet standards or it will be removed. He looked at Sarah one last time, not with pity, but with that cold interest of a man testing a fence before he buys the field. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. They walked out with the same entitled grace with which they had walked in. The door shut. The room breathed. Mr. Halpern let his shoulders relax and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I apologize for that. They have been aggressive lately. Sarah stared at the closed door as if it might open again. Her mouth was dry. They can't do that, she said, but it sounded like a question. The lawyer straightened a page. They cannot do what they just threatened. No. They can, however, make noise. They can send paper. They can hope you are too tired to fight. He looked at Daniel. Which, I assume, is not the case. Daniel's face was calm, but his eyes had cooled another shade. He reached forward and, very gently, turned the will so that it faced him. He placed 2 fingers on the line that named him Executor. He did not tap it. He did not point to it. He simply rested his hand there as if feeling the weight of the ink. We'll follow the will, he said. All of it. Mr. Halpern nodded. Then we move quickly. I'll file a notice with the county recorder, attach the will, and send a letter to their counsel. We will also pull every document they claim to have. If they forged anything, we will find it. He slid the small wooden box towards Sarah. Your father asked me to give you this when we read that line. Sarah opened the brass latch with careful fingers. Inside was a folded map, the edges soft from years of being opened and folded again. On the map, the lake was a silver shape, the road a thin line, the parcel a square hugged by trees. In the margin, in her father's hand, was a note, for Sarah. So you always know the way home. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. She had learned to hold them in the moment and bury them in the night. She closed the box and set it gently on her lap like something living. They think they've won, she whispered. They think they can take everything if they talk like they own the world. Daniel stood. He buttoned his jacket. When he spoke, the softness in his voice stayed, but something else had appeared under it. Something steady and absolute. They don't know who I am. Sarah looked up, confused and a little scared. You're my brother, she said, trying to smile. He nodded. And I'm the executor. He glanced at the door the HOA had walked through, then back to their lawyer. Let them send paper. Let them send men with tote bags. We'll answer with the law. He reached for the business card Cole had left and slid it back across the desk as if returning a piece in a small game. And when they say expect notices, we will let them learn what they should expect. Outside, the street had begun to dry. The clouds were thinning. The wet pavement held a pale reflection of the sky. As they left the office, Sarah tucked the wooden box close to her chest, and Daniel held the door for her like any good brother would. But his eyes, as they met the light, were not the eyes of a man who would ask permission from people who barged into grief with rules and smiles. They were the eyes of a man who had already seen the end of a path and chosen to walk it. In the parking lot, Sarah hesitated by the car. What if they really can do it? She asked. What if they can take it? Daniel opened her door and spoke in that gentle way again, the way that made fear step back a little. They can threaten. They can pretend. They can talk. But they cannot change what is written. He tapped the roof lightly twice, a small habit from childhood, and went around to his side. As he started the engine, Sarah looked once more at the office window where Mr. Halpern's lamp glowed, steady and warm. She looked down at the box in her hands and the map inside it, and then at her brother's calm profile. The fear did not vanish, but it found a place to sit that was not her throat. The car pulled out onto the clean, wet street. Behind them, on a desk with a tidy stack of papers, a will lay open to a page where a line was underlined in blue. In front of them, a narrow road led toward the lake, and beyond that, to a small cabin with a crooked porch that now stood not only on land and wood and nails, but on a promise sealed in ink and law and blood. The HOA believed they had one because they were loud. They did not yet know the power of quiet. They did not yet know what it meant when a man says no without raising his voice. They did not yet know who they had tried to push aside. Suspense hung over the gray afternoon like a new storm gathering its shape. The board would send letters. They would smile in public and move papers in private. They would whisper the word jurisdiction as if it were a key that opens any door. And while they did, Daniel would open the right doors with the right keys, the kind that only an executor holds. The day, like the street, was clearing. Somewhere up ahead, a dock would creak, the screen door would stick, and the trees would keep their slow counsel. But before any of that, there would be the first answer to the first threat, written not in a glossy brochure but in the same language the HOA thought they owned. The language of filings, of records, of maps with edges that do not move because someone smiled. The engine hummed. The wipers clicked once to chase away a few last drops. Sarah watched the city slip behind them and whispered, almost to herself, "He wanted me to have it." Daniel nodded without looking away from the road. "You will." And somewhere, in a tidy house with a boardroom table and a bowl of wrapped candies, a man in a navy blazer would sit down, read an email that did not sound angry at all, and feel for the first time a small weight under his heart that had nothing to do with rain or paper. It would feel like the beginning of losing. The will had been read. The claim had been made. The first line had been spoken. And the quiet man who held the pen had just said no. Sarah had believed that once the will was read, once her father's words were on paper, things would be simple. The cabin would be hers, the land would be hers, and she would be free to walk the old path to the lake without fear. But only a week later, reality struck like another storm. When she drove up the narrow road to the cabin, she found a bright orange sign nailed to the gate. Property under association review. Entry restricted. Her hands shook as she tore it down, but a neighbor walking his dog only laughed and said, "Better be careful, they fine people for that." She could not believe it. It was her land. Her father's gift. How could strangers come and post signs? The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail, folded neatly in a white envelope with the HOA logo printed at the top. It listed unpaid assessments totaling thousands of dollars and threatened legal action if she failed to comply. She read the words over and over, tears blurring the ink. Her father had never been late on a single payment in his life. These fines were lies, but the letters kept coming. Every week, another envelope. Every week, another threat. Soon, the whispers began. At the grocery store, two women looked at her and whispered about people who can't manage their property. At the gas station, someone smirked and asked, "So, when are you selling the cabin?" It was as if the whole neighborhood had been turned against her by the HOA's voice. She called the number on the letter, demanding answers, but the woman on the other end only spoke in a flat, rehearsed tone. "You are out of compliance. Pay the assessments or face further consequences." Sarah's hands shook with rage, but she had no power to fight them. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with unpaid bills spread before her. She cried silently, wondering if her father had been wrong, if the cabin would slip away no matter what the will said. But Daniel sat across from her, calm as always. He didn't scold her, didn't tell her not to cry. He only watched, silent, steady, as if he were waiting for something. Finally, she asked, "Why are you so calm?" "They're stealing from us. They're destroying everything he left me. How can you just sit there?" Daniel leaned forward, folded one of the letters, and placed it neatly on the table. His eyes were steady as stone. "Because they don't know who they're dealing with." Sarah blinked, confused, but before she could ask more, he stood and began gathering the papers. He didn't speak another word. The next day, the HOA escalated. They chained the gate at the cabin and left another bright sign, warning of trespassing fines. When Sarah tried to drive up, two board members blocked her car and told her she was no longer authorized. She shouted at them, her voice breaking, but they only smirked and said, "Rules are rules." She drove home in tears, shaking with helpless fury. Neighbors whispered again, this time louder, some even suggesting she should just sell and leave. It felt like everyone had turned against her. Everyone except her brother. That night, she slammed the stack of notices down on the table in front of him. "They won," she said bitterly. "They'll take it no matter what. I can't fight them. They have lawyers. They have power. I'm just one person." Daniel picked up the papers one by one, scanning them with the same quiet patience he always had. His eyes did not show fear, only calculation. After a long silence, he said softly, "You're not one person. You're the heir. And I'm the executor. That means something they've forgotten." She stared at him, her breath caught between hope and disbelief. "But they've taken everything already," she whispered. Daniel finally looked up, and for the first time in weeks, there was the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth, not of amusement, but of certainty. "No," he said calmly. "They've only taken what I've let them." Sarah sat back, stunned. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but something in his voice eased the fear in her chest. It was like standing next to a wall that would not fall, no matter how hard the wind blew. She realized then that Daniel's silence was not weakness. It was preparation. The HOA thought they had broken her. They thought she was alone. But they had no idea that her brother was far more than just a quiet man with calm eyes. He was the executor of the will, and his power was just beginning to unfold. Daniel had always been the quiet one, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, but when he listened, he remembered everything. While Sarah broke under the weight of threats and notices, Daniel's silence was not defeat. It was calculation. The HOA thought their letters, chains, and threats would scare both siblings into surrender, but Daniel was not the kind of man who bowed under paper threats. He understood power worked in layers, and to fight it, one needed proof. Late at night, when the town was asleep, Daniel sat at the dining table with a lamp burning low, the stack of HOA letters spread before him. He read each one carefully, marking strange details with a pen. Dates that didn't match. Charges issued before Sarah had even been notified. Claimed violations on structures that did not exist. He circled words, connected lines, and slowly built a map of lies. But papers were only the start. Daniel knew the truth was deeper. He drove to the county office one morning, leaving before Sarah was awake. The building was quiet, just a clerk behind glass and shelves stacked with old records. He spent hours combing through property deeds, annexation requests, and board filings. When he asked for the most recent HOA claim, the clerk brought him a thin folder that looked official at first glance but crumbled under his eyes. The so-called annexation vote had 3 signatures, all from board members, no petition from property owners, no county approval. It was a forgery dressed up as law. He copied the documents, slipped them into his leather folder, and walked out with the same calm steps he always had, but inside, his anger sharpened into a blade. That night, he didn't tell Sarah everything, not yet. She sat at the table, her hands covering her face, whispering that she couldn't take the pressure anymore, that every neighbor looked at her like she was an intruder in her own father's land. Daniel listened, nodded, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Rest," he said softly. "You don't need to fight this. That's my job." She didn't understand, but the steadiness in his voice gave her a breath of relief. He waited until she went to bed, then pulled out the copied documents and continued his work. Over the next week, Daniel began to dig deeper. He followed board members quietly, noting their routines, who they met, and where they went. He saw the HOA president, Cole, meet late at night with a local contractor, handing him envelopes that looked far too thick for simple receipts. He saw another board member walking out of the bank with a bag of files, her eyes darting like a guilty thief. Daniel even managed to slip into the public records of the HOA's finances, which were supposed to be transparent. What he found there was worse than he imagined. Money was missing. Large sums labeled as community improvement projects had no actual projects attached to them. The HOA wasn't just bullying Sarah. They had built an entire system of theft, bleeding homeowners with fake fines, pocketing the money, and silencing anyone who asked questions. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line as he read through the numbers. Every lie, every false signature, every missing dollar was another nail in the coffin the HOA had built for itself. They thought no one would ever look closely. They thought their victims were too weak, too afraid, or too poor to challenge them. But they had not counted on an executor. Daniel returned home late one night and found Sarah waiting by the window. Her face was tired, her eyes red. "You've been gone every day," she said, her voice small. "What are you doing?" Please tell me you haven't given up on the cabin. He set his folder down gently on the table and met her gaze. I haven't given up, he said quietly. I've been digging, and I've found what they've been hiding. She frowned, confused, but he didn't explain yet. Instead, he placed one of the forged annexation documents in front of her. Look at the dates, he said. She scanned the paper, her hands shaking. It doesn't even make sense. It's fake, Daniel said simply. And it's only the beginning. Sarah looked at him with a mix of fear and hope. But how do we fight them? They have lawyers, money, people in their pocket. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his face calm, his voice low. They don't know me. They don't know that every piece of paper they forged is now in my hands. They don't know I'm watching their every move. And they don't know that I'm not going to fight them on their terms. I'll fight them on mine. Sarah sat in silence, realizing that her brother wasn't just calm, he was prepared. He had been building something in the shadows while she thought all was lost. For the first time since their father's death, she felt a spark of hope. The HOA believed they had cornered her, crushed her, stolen her inheritance. But Daniel had just begun. And the way his eyes burned behind that calm mask told her one thing clearly. The HOA had made the worst mistake of their lives. The HOA moved quickly after their first threats, and within 2 weeks they were acting as if the cabin already belonged to them. New signs went up along the road leading to the property, bright red letters declaring private HOA management. Workers came with clipboards, measuring fences, taking photographs, and speaking loudly about non-compliant structures. It was all theater, a show meant to scare Sarah into giving up. The board members strutted through the neighborhood as if they had already won, their voices carrying in smug conversations about absorbing new property and setting an example. To them, Sarah was finished, a small voice that could never fight their money and lawyers. They celebrated their so-called victory one Saturday evening with a community barbecue in the park. Long tables were covered with food, music played from rented speakers, and the HOA president, Cole, stood at the center like a king among his followers. He laughed, he shook hands, and he spoke too loudly about the progress they were making. Every word was sharp enough for Sarah to hear, even though she sat far away on the grass, her arms wrapped around her knees. She felt smaller than she ever had before. The cabin wasn't just a building, it was her father's promise, her piece of him left in the world, and now it was being stolen in plain sight while people cheered. Children ran past her laughing, neighbors clapped as Cole gave another speech about order and community strength. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her chest heavy with shame and helpless rage. She wanted to scream, to stand up and tell everyone the truth, but her voice stuck in her throat. Nobody wanted to hear her side. To them, she was already the loser in a fight she hadn't even chosen. She looked for Daniel among the crowd and finally saw him standing at the edge of the park. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't frowning. He was simply watching, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders steady. The music, the speeches, the laughter, none of it touched him. He looked like a man who already knew the end of the story and was just waiting for the others to catch up. Later that night, when they were home, Sarah finally broke. She sat at the kitchen table, her face in her hands, tears spilling onto the wood. It's over, she whispered. They've taken everything. They're mocking me in front of the whole town. Even the neighbors believe them. I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I can't fight them. Daniel sat across from her, silent, letting her words fall. He didn't rush to comfort her with empty promises. He didn't argue. He waited until her sobs slowed, until the quiet filled the space between them like water filling a glass. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and calm. Sarah, he said, do you trust me? She lifted her red eyes, confused. Of course I do. But what good does that do now? They're too powerful. They'll crush us. Daniel reached out and placed one of the HOA notices on the table between them. He tapped the paper gently with his finger. They think this means power, he said softly. But power doesn't come from paper. It comes from truth. And the truth is ours. She shook her head, not understanding. They have lawyers, Daniel. They have judges in their pocket. They have money. What do we have? His lips curved slightly, not in a smile, but in something sharper. We have the will. And we have me. Sarah blinked, startled by the quiet confidence in his tone. She had always known her brother was steady, but in that moment she saw something different. Something stronger, deeper, almost frightening in its certainty. He leaned back, his eyes steady on hers. They think they've won. Let them think it. Let them laugh, let them celebrate, let them believe the cabin is theirs. They don't know who I am. They don't know what I've been preparing. Sarah swallowed, her fear twisting into something else. Something closer to hope but still fragile. What do you mean? Who are you to them? Daniel stood, gathering the stack of HOA notices into his folder. He looked at her, his face calm but his eyes burning with quiet fire. I am the executor of the will, he said. That makes me the wall they will break against. They just don't know it yet. His words hung in the air, heavier than any threat the HOA had spoken. Sarah watched him walk away from the table, his step steady, his back straight. For the first time, she realized her brother was not just defending her. He was planning something far greater than she had imagined. Outside, the night was still. In the distance, the faint sound of the HOA's music and laughter carried on the breeze. But inside their home, silence pressed close, filled with the weight of Daniel's promise. The calm before the storm had settled, and though Sarah did not know exactly what was coming, she believed now that when it arrived, it would shake the HOA to its core. The HOA board meeting was supposed to be another show of power. They had reserved the community hall, set up long tables, and even placed pitchers of water and cups neatly as if it were a serious government meeting. Neighbors filled the chairs, some curious, some nervous, some eager to see how the board would finalize their control over the cabin. At the head sat Richard Cole, the HOA president, wearing his blazer with the silver pin, his smile sharp as ever. Beside him were the other board members, shuffling papers and whispering with smug expressions. They believed tonight would be the final nail, the moment they could claim Sarah's inheritance as their own. Sarah sat quietly in the back row, her hands clenched tight in her lap. She felt small under the weight of so many eyes. Every whisper in the room making her sink deeper into her chair. She had begged Daniel not to come, afraid the board would humiliate him the way they humiliated her. But Daniel had only looked at her calmly and said, "This is the night they learn." Now, he walked into the hall with his leather folder under his arm, his steps steady and unhurried. The chatter quieted as he made his way to the front, not to sit in the audience, but to stand directly across from the board's table. Richard Cole's smile widened. "Ah, Mr. Reed. I'm glad you're here. Perhaps we can finally resolve this dispute without wasting everyone's time. We'll give you one last chance to sign over jurisdiction before we pursue full legal action." He tapped the papers before him like a dealer ready to throw cards. Daniel set his folder down on the table slowly, carefully, and looked Cole in the eye. "You've had many chances to stop," he said quietly. "Tonight, I stop you." A ripple of unease moved through the audience. Daniel opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one. "You claim annexation," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Here are the county records proving no such annexation exists. Your vote was invalid, your minutes meaningless." Gasps rose as he spread copies of official stamped papers. Cole leaned forward, his smile thinning. "This is irrelevant. The board has authority. Daniel interrupted, his voice still calm. He laid down another set of papers. "Here are your financial statements. Missing funds. Payments labeled as improvements that never happened. Contractors who never existed. Money that went straight into board members' accounts." The audience murmured louder, neighbors turning to each other with shocked faces. One woman gasped audibly when Daniel read out the name of a board member and the amount of money they had stolen. "These are lies," Cole snapped, sweat beginning to shine at his temples. Daniel ignored him and placed down the last set of documents. "And finally, the will. My father's last words, signed and notarized, naming my sister as heir and me as executor. That means every decision regarding the cabin, Every legal right to defend it is mine. And I am defending it now. His voice grew colder, sharper. You thought you could forge, steal, and intimidate. But you forgot something. I am the executor. I am not here to ask. I am here to enforce. The hall was silent except for the sound of papers shifting as neighbors leaned forward to see the proof. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of awe. Her brother stood like a wall no one could push. Richard Cole tried to laugh, but it came out thin, broken. You think you can scare us with papers? We have lawyers. We have the budget to bury you. Daniel finally allowed himself the faintest smile, but it was not warm. It was sharp and cold. Then I suggest you call them quickly. Because as of this moment, these documents are already filed with the county. Fraud charges are pending. Financial theft investigations have begun. Every lie you wrote is now public record. A wave of gasps swept the hall. Some neighbors clapped their hands over their mouths. Others turned to glare at the board members, anger rising as they realized they too had been stolen from. Cole's face turned red, his hands trembling on the table. The other board members shifted nervously, their earlier smugness gone. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low but carrying through the room like a knife through silence. You thought you could steal from family. You thought no one would fight back. But you made one mistake. You underestimated me. He gathered his papers, tucked them neatly back into his folder, and straightened. This meeting is over. The only thing left for you now is to face the consequences. He turned his back on the board and walked to the back of the hall where Sarah sat frozen. As he passed, the neighbors who once whispered against them now leaned back, giving him space, their eyes wide with new respect. When he reached his sister, he placed a hand on her shoulder. It's done, he said softly. She looked up at him, her tears shining in the light. For the first time since the nightmare began, she believed him completely. Behind them, the room erupted, some neighbors shouting at the board, others demanding answers, and Richard Cole's voice breaking as he tried to calm the storm. But the storm was no longer his to control. It belonged to Daniel now. The community hall was no longer under the HOA's control. The air had changed. Neighbors who once stayed silent now stood, their voices loud and angry, demanding answers. Some shouted at the board for years of lies, others yelled about their own unexplained fines. The once confident leaders of the HOA sat pale and sweating, their fake smiles gone, their eyes darting like trapped animals. Richard Cole slammed his hand on the table, his voice cracking as he tried to shout over the chaos. This is out of order. This is misinformation. But no one listened. Every neighbor now looked at him with suspicion and fury. Daniel stood at the back with Sarah, his presence calm, steady, like a rock in the storm. When the shouting grew too loud, he finally stepped forward again, his voice rising just enough to cut through the noise. You all wanted the truth, he said, holding the folder aloft. Here it is. These people have been stealing from you, lying to you, bullying you into silence. They thought no one would ever stand against them. Tonight, that ends. The hall grew quiet, the silence heavy with expectation. Daniel placed one last document on the board's table, sliding it forward so everyone could see. Here is the county filing, effective immediately. The annexation is void. The cabin remains in my sister's name. And as executor, I have already pressed charges for fraud and financial theft against the entire board. Gasps filled the hall. Sarah's heart pounded as she saw the papers stamped with official seals, undeniable proof that Daniel had done more than talk, he had acted. Cole's face turned gray, his lips trembling as he tried to speak, but words failed him. One board member dropped her pen, her hands shaking violently. Another stared at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the angry crowd. The neighbors, once passive, now surged forward, voices rising in outrage. You lied to us, one man shouted. You stole our money, cried another. The board tried to protest, but their words were drowned under the storm of voices. Daniel didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. His calm, silent presence was louder than any scream. He looked at Sarah, who sat wide-eyed, unable to believe what was unfolding. He leaned down and whispered, "It's over. You have your father's land. They can never touch it again." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of relief, of freedom. She clutched his hand, whispering back, "You saved me. You saved everything." Outside the hall, the night air was cool and clear. Daniel led Sarah out while the storm of anger roared behind them. Neighbors shouted, board members scrambled, the whole HOA power crumbling under the weight of truth. By the time the county investigators arrived, summoned by Daniel's filings, the once proud leaders were nothing more than cornered liars waiting for justice. The next days brought a wave of change. News spread quickly through the neighborhood, then through the county. The HOA board was suspended, their bank accounts frozen, their reputations shattered. For years, they had ruled with intimidation, but now they were the ones whispered about with disgust. Sarah walked to the cabin a week later, her steps slow, her heart heavy with memories. The gate was open, the signs torn down, the chains gone. She stood before her father's house, the scent of pine in the air, the sound of the lake in the distance. For the first time since his death, she felt peace. Daniel stood beside her, his expression calm as always, but his eyes softened when he looked at her. "It's yours," he said simply. "No one can take it now." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You don't need to. This is what family does. Father trusted me to guard his will, and I kept that promise." Sarah hugged him tightly, holding on to him as if afraid he might disappear. For the first time in weeks, her laughter returned, small but real. Behind them, the neighborhood would take years to heal, but the poison of the HOA had finally been purged. And it had been done not with shouting, not with fists, but with patience, proof, and the quiet strength of a man who refused to bend. As they stood before the cabin, the rising sun painted the land in gold. The world felt new again. The HOA had thought they could steal an inheritance and bury a family's legacy, but they had underestimated the executor. Daniel had turned their lies into their undoing, and in the end, it was not the HOA that stood tall, but the family they had tried to destroy.